Today we're going to start Lamed Beis. Kulan Sheiben Kedushin Agerishim Besuffolk. Lamed Beis. 30b. You see that? Okay. The Mishnah. Yeah. Is that what we're holding? I thought that's what we're holding. Okay. Thank Hashem.
Start Sunday.
Oh, thank Hashem that we're able to learn. Everyone should have for Shlema, and everyone should be safe. Should have to be some English immediately. Okay. Mishnah says, Kulan Shahi ben Kedushin Agerishim Besuffolk Harei Atzaris Cholzis V'lei Mesiyabmes. Kulan. Who's the Kulan? All 15 women that we said in the beginning of the Masechta, that if they're married to the brother, and the brother also has a tzara, also has a second wife. So when this fellow passes away, Yibam is performed by the brother. Yeah, Ruvain has two wives. One of them is a relative of Shimon, and one of them is not. Then Ruvain passes away. So Shimon can't do Yibam on his relative, of course. Let's say it's his daughter or his mother-in-law or something. He also can't do Yibam on the tzara. You don't need chalitza either, because there's clearly no mitzvah of Yibam. However, our Mishnah comes along and says that, let's say Reuven was not totally married to Shimon's relative, his daughter or his mother-in-law. He was besuffolk married to her. We have to see what's an example of that. Or maybe he was besuffolk divorced from her. So in that case, you do chalitza. Why do you do chalitza? Well, who do you do chalitza on? You only do chalitza on the tzara. The relative is either married or not. If she's married, you don't do yibam or chalitza because it's a relative. If she's not, then she's not even in the part of the family, so it's the tzara that we're discussing here. And the reason why you can't do yibam is because maybe the relative is really married, and this is called tzaras erva. This is the co-wife of a relative, and maybe the relative is not married. So because of that doubt, you do chalitza. Okay. Ketzad Suffolk Kedushin. What's the case of Suffolk Kedushin? So Zarak la Kedushin, Suffolk Karav la, Suffolk Karav la. So Suffolk Kedushin. He throws her, I guess, the money. He throws her the money. And the way Rashi is learning this is that Dalaram Shaladam Kunislik. A person can acquire things in his courtyard without him actually lifting it up or pulling it or all of that. He can acquire it in his courtyard. Well, a person's 4 cubits in a Rosh Hashanah, his 4 amas that are surrounding him, is considered his courtyard. So this fellow threw the money to her, the ring or whatever, and it landed exactly on the line between his 4 amas and her 4 amas. That's how Rashi learns it. Yeah, there's other ways of learning it. You can learn it that it's karev la. It was who could watch it better. It doesn't have to be really 4 amas. Anyway, that's how Rashi learns it. Okay, so it's a suffix. So Suffolk Kedushin. Suffolk Gerishin. What's a Suffolk divorce? Kasav b'ksav yadai vein alavedim. Let's say he wrote it in his handwriting. The husband actually wrote the get himself, but there's no witnesses on it. Or yesh alavedim vein beisman. Or there are witnesses on it, but there was no zman. They didn't put a date on the get. Or yesh beisman vein be'alei dechat. Or there is the date on the get, but there's only one witness. And one witness together with the cipher maybe could be considered the other witness because someone had to write this. So together with the witness signing, that would be considered too. The Gemara says, Zeu Safek Gerishin. The Mishnah says, this is a question if this is really a get. And so therefore, the tzara, the co-wife of this relative that's possibly divorced, cannot do yibam on the brother because maybe there's a relative here and she's a tsaras erva. She can't go out free because maybe there is no relative here and she does have to do yibum. So what we say is that she does chalitza. Now, what's the biblical standing of all of this? What is she biblically? I know what the rabbis say that she has to chalitza. So what's understood from this is that biblically these gittin are acceptable, and biblically the kedushin was not acceptable. That we said when it was safek karav la, safek karav. So in these cases, really, there is no erva here. In these cases, yibum would really have worked. But we don't do yibum because of the that's what it seems. But we don't do yibum because of the doubt, rabbinically. And therefore, chalitza is a me'ikar adin. Chalitza is a real chalitza. Okay, the Gemara has an observation that the Mishnah, when it was talking about kedushin, the safek kedushin, it gave an interesting example. It says that he threw the money to her and it landed halfway, exactly on the line between him and her. By the get, you could have done the same thing. You could have said that he threw the get to her and it landed halfway on the line. We didn't do that. We gave other examples of gittin that were biblically acceptable, but rabbinically there's rules that you need to have the date in it and you need to have the two witnesses in it, all of that. Why don't we use the example that we used for kedushin, where he threw it and it landed halfway? The get, he threw the get halfway and it landed halfway in between. Bila begerishin safek karav la, safek karav la, like tani. My timer, why doesn't it use that example? Amarabba, Rabba explains, Ishazu becheskas hetel l'shukay medas. This woman, we're referring now to the tzara, the co-wife of the woman that's being divorced. Her assumed status is that she's a tzaras erva. She's a co-wife of a relative of Shimon. She's a co-wife of Reuven. She's a wife of Reuven, but the other wife here is a relative of Shimon, and which is maybe Shimon's daughter. Okay. When Reuven passes away, her assumed status, her chazaka is that she does not need chalitza and yibam, for sure not. Why? She's a tzaras erva. What's the question? Question is, maybe she got divorced, but we're not going to change her assumed status unless we know that it's changed. Her assumed status is that she's going to be allowed to marry anyone because she's a tzaras erva. She doesn't need yibam, she doesn't need chalitza. Did her status change that now she's not a tzaras erva because there was a get? Well, prove that there's a get. Until you can prove that, her status will remain the same. So that's what Rabbi is saying. She was becheskas hetel l'shukay medas. She did not need yibam mar chalitza. Umisafek at the bala isra. You're just creating a doubt here. Maybe the get reached her. Oh, maybe the get reached her. Now you wanted to do chalitza because now she's not a tzaras erva because the other wife was already divorced. Al tashana misafek. Don't make her forbidden to get married just because of a doubt that maybe a get had landed near her. Basically, what Rabbi is saying is that in that case, the get would be nothing. We don't even know that the get existed. So she's going to fall back on her assumed status that she's going to be permissible. See, we're holding. We're up to Amar Le'abaya, which is on 30b. 30. Yeah. It's right there. It's no, Amalei Abaya is on the right side, the right column. Amalei Abaya. Yeah, we started from the Mishnah. So Amalei Abaya says, Yachi b'kedushin nami nema. Ishizu b'cheskas heta liyaba my medas and misafik ata bala isra. Al tasana misafik. Abaya takes the other approach. So it's like this. You had a doubt about kedushin. You had a doubt about gerushin. The example that you used for kedushin was different than the one for gerushin. You explained why you didn't choose that example for gerushin, because you said that she has an assumed status. And that example would not change her assumed status. They said, so by kedushin also, that example shouldn't change her assumed status. What was her chazaka, her assumed status by kedushin? We said, this relative of Shimon, this Reuven and Shimon, Reuven is married to this woman, a regular woman, and then he decides he's going to marry another wife, which is going to be Shimon's relative, Shimon's daughter, let's say. Okay, now that marriage wasn't so clear that it actually worked. He took money and he threw it towards her, and it landed halfway between him and her. So now, is the second wife, I don't know what, let's call her Sarah, is this other wife considered a co-wife?
Sarah. Oh.
Is Sarah the co-wife of Shimon's daughter? Because we don't know if she got married or not.
They were just engaged, right?
No, he threw money to her to marry it. Let's say her name is Miriam. Shimon's daughter is Miriam, let's say. Reuven threw money to Miriam to marry her, but the money landed halfway between.
Oh.
So now Sarah, which is the real wife, is she a co-wife now to Miriam or not? Because Miriam may not be married. So what would the assumed status be before the marriage? The assumed status is that now that Reuven passed away, she would be permissible to do Yibam with Shimon.
I didn't know that was the custom to throw money in.
No, the custom was to do a ring or something. But in this case, it was COVID. So he threw the money, whatever the case was. So
it looked as though.
So the witnesses that saw the wedding, they said, we're not so sure if it landed closer to, okay. The assumed status of Sarah, in this case, was that she would be permissible to the Yavam to do Yibam. To Shimon, she would do Yibam. Now, what are you trying to do? You're trying to change her assumed status by saying she's now married to Miriam, which is Shimon's, not she's married. Reuven is now married to Miriam, which is Shimon's daughter, which is going to change the status of Sarah. So how can you change the status? Right? Same thing. Abaya throws back Rabba's answer. He throws it back at Rabbah. He throws Rabbah's answer. He says, so the same thing should apply to Kedushin. The Gemara says, Hasam l'chumra. By the Kedushin, you're right. Really, her assumed status is that she's permissible to do Yibam on Shimon. However, since it appears that she may be a Tsaras Erva, so the rabbi said that she should do Chalitza. It's a Chumrah. The Gemara asks, okay, so what are we saying? How did we explain a co-wife of a relative? Really, she's not a co-wife of a relative. But the rabbi said that to do Chalitza and not do Yibam. Because it appears that maybe she is a co-wife of the relative. It looks like she's a co-wife. Okay. Now, how does this change by the Gittin? We have to wait for the Gemara. The Gemara is going to ask the same thing so then say the same thing for the get. But hold on. First, before we get to that, we say, what type of chumrah is this? I understand that you want to be machmer, but it's a chumrah. Chumrah dasil dekula. There's going to come out of leniency. Why? because Zimnin the Azal hu umekadesh la la'achaysa. Let's say Reuven that did this doubtful wedding on Miriam now goes ahead and marries Miriam's sister. I don't know, Miriam's sister, let's make a name, Yocheved. Yeah, but the problem is he wasn't necessarily married to to Miriam, because the money didn't really reach her. It was a suffix.
So
It was a suffix.
Wife's sister.
Yeah, his wife. Yeah. So now, is the marriage to Yocheved,
The first one.
the second one, is that acceptable? Depends if the first one was good. Okay. But what we're going to see is that because we're requiring chalitza,
First marriage was a doubt to begin with, whether or not that was a
Right.
valid marriage.
right? One second. Kedushin Nami. By the Kedushin, because we're not letting her do Yibam. Why aren't we letting her do Yibam? Because we're being machmer. But when we're saying that you can't do Yibam, we're also saying that the wedding that was done on Miriam was not valid, which no, I'm sorry. We're saying that the wedding to Miriam was valid. We're saying that the wedding to Miriam was yes. The first one was yes valid, which means that the second one was not valid. And how we're showing that? By not allowing Shimon to do chalitza, to do Yibam on Sarah. Because Sarah was the Tzara Serva, was a co-wife of Miriam. Yeah. There's three women here.
Oh, he's married to Sarah.
Yeah.
That's real. No one does that.
Right. Over there we said that you can't do Yibam because it could be the marriage to Miriam, which is Shimon's relative, was a valid marriage. He said, it's just a chumrah, don't do Yibam. That's just a chumrah. He said, 1 second, it's not just a chumrah, because when you do that and you say that you can't do Yibam, what you're also saying is that Miriam's marriage was a valid marriage, which would mean that Yocheved's marriage was not a marriage at all, which would mean that Yocheved doesn't need a get.
I heard somewhere that you need one of three or all three different elements for it to be a legal marriage.
Right. One of three.
Wedding ring.
Right. One of three.
Marriage and also, one of three.
Yeah.
So this, it doesn't seem like any.
Well, the money, if she acquired the money, then that would be the
You
money.
need to give like a ring and say a certain bracha.
Yeah, he said the phrase and he threw it. Question is if that's considered that she received it.
I've heard of stories of like actors doing this with just people on the street causing issues in Israel.
Right. Right. So our first example here of it's a chumrah da asili de kula. We're going to come out with a leniency because we're just strict. What's the leniency? That the third wife, Yocheved, is not going to need any get. Okay.
They're making marriage way too easy.
Now, It's more than the get. What's really going to happen here is that Yocheved married to Reuven. Well, that all depends if Miriam was married to Reuven. If Miriam was married, then Yocheved is not. If Miriam was not, then Yocheved is. Because the marriage won't even take effect on a wife's sister. It's like you did nothing. It's not a marriage at all.
Right.
So what about if Reuven's brother comes along and tries to marry Yocheved?
That would be
Would that marriage work? It's his brother's wife, possibly, depending on if Miriam was married. So whatever the case is, when you establish Miriam's marriage, you're also detracting from Yocheved's marriage, which would allow the brothers to marry Yocheved. Okay, next case. Vinami. Zimnen das acher makadosh la ledida kedushi vadei. Maybe someone else is going to come along and marry Miriam. Because you did not allow Sarah to do Yibam on Shimon, what did you really say by saying that? That Miriam was married to Reuven. So Amri will say, the Kama Kiddushin, that Miriam was married to Reuven, yes. And that's why Sarah cannot do Yibam, because she's a Tzaras Erva. Miriam was a relative of Shimon. With the Basalav Kedushin. And the second person that came and tried to marry Miriam is not a marriage at all. No get, nothing. So the Gemara, so Abaya is challenging Rabbah. Rabbah gave an answer. He says, don't worry that we're not allowing Yibam by the Suffolk Mekudeshes when he threw the Kedushin to Miriam, which was a relative of Shimon, which would affect the Yibam of Sarah. We're saying that really it's not a marriage at all. Really, it's not a marriage at all. We're just saying that nevertheless, she shouldn't. Sarah shouldn't do Yibam. Says, but by saying that, you're saying that it is a marriage. By saying that is a marriage, you're also saying that any subsequent marriage to her is going to be nothing, and that's all not true. Gemara says, "Kiman the kamatzra chalitza made the yada the chumra balmo." It says, no. If you would have said that you don't have to do chalitza, then we would say, yeah, there would be a problem. But because we're saying that you have to do chalitza, we're saying that you can't do yibam. That's a chumrah. But we're not saying that you go away for scot-free. That this woman is really a co-wife of a relative. We're saying that you have to do chalitza. So you have to do chalitza, then people will see already that it's not so simple, and that they have to take care of the second marriage to this woman or to the woman's sister or whatever. Yeah. Umar says, "Yihachi gerish nami." Back to our original question. By the divorce, he said maybe he threw the get and it landed halfway between him and her. And it's a suffix if she's divorced. So we said, no, we're not going to make her divorced like that because
just physically like pick it up.
Well,
That's what we
it
do.
really needs to acquire it. The
Why?
divorce is affected by the acquisition of the get. So
Right.
if it's in her property, so that would be good enough. Now, if it's closer to her than to him, then that would be in her property. They were standing 8 feet apart, let's say. So now there's a doubt. So we said that we're not going to change the assumed status of Sarah. She was married for real because of Miriam's potential get. Miriam was Shimon's relative. So we said, but 1 second, let's just be machmer. Yachi Gershanami, listening, say the same case that he threw the get. What are you worried about? I know she's allowed to get she's allowed to have marry out. She's allowed to marry. You see, she's allowed to marry anyone without yibam or chalitza. But you said that just chalitza doesn't really create a problem because we say, well, we didn't allow yibam. The other way we said she should be allowed to do yibam. We said, but we're machmer, we make it do chalitza. So we said, but maybe it's going to come to a kula. We said, no, because we're requiring chalitza, then we know that it's not so simple. So let's do it the opposite as well. I know really she doesn't need yibam or chalitza, but let's just require chalitza and not allow yibam. And we'll say, you made the other, the chomer ba'almu, and everyone know that it's just being strict. It says, imata imer chiletzes, that we have a problem here.
I mean, you lost me earlier because it seems like this get, seems like it's, owner was like, it's hefty. Then we learn like she has to,
She has to acquire. A get has to be acquired. Today, the way a get is given is it's handed into the woman's hand, and she lifts it up, and she puts it into her purse, and she makes an acquisition on the get. There's other ways of acquiring something. If it's put into her property in a protected area, then it's considered that it's yeah. I think like what do they have to do? The court, they have to hand you to serve papers. They have to actually, put it in the person's hand. And so, yeah, according to the Torah law, it really just has to go into the property. Yeah, so that's what we're saying. We don't do this. We don't want just put it in the property. We would put it into her hands. But according to the Torah law, the property would be enough. So here, it's not even the property. Here, it's Rosh Hashanah. But because it's within her 4 cubits, we're going to say that's enough also, because that's considered her territory, her domain. The Gemara says, no, I have a problem. You see, we're working at this both ways. By the Kedushin, the Suffolk Kedushin, we said really Sarah should be allowed to do Yibam. But we said, let's not allow her to do Yibam and we'll make her do Chalitza. Now what the Gemara is going to say is, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? She's going to actually do Yibam. All right, she was allowed to do Yibam anyway. Now we're going the other way. We're saying by the Gerushin. Really, she's not allowed to do Yibam. Why? Because the co-wife is a relative of Shimon. So really we should say nothing. Which is what we were saying, so that there's nothing there. Yibam is off the table. The Gemara is suggesting that maybe we should require Chalitza because, well, just to be strict, because he threw the get, maybe it's considered that she's divorced. And if she's divorced, then really there should be Chalitza there.
Oh, you perform Chalitza when you divorce?
No.
Oh.
There's 2 wives.
Okay.
One of them is not a relative of the brother. And one of them is a relative of the brother. Now, if the one that's a relative of the brother is divorced, then Chalitza would have to be done on the other one. So the names we're giving here is that Sarah is the non-relative and Miriam is the yes relative. And the question is, was Miriam divorced by the get being thrown? So we said we should require Chalitza on Sarah after Reuben passed away, because just maybe. So the Gemara says, no, if you do that, then maybe Miss Yevamos, maybe you'll do Chalitza also. That's a very interesting chashash. But the Gemara says, well, Hachanami, so why you didn't have that problem when by Kedushin, you said that if you say that you do Chalitza, maybe they'll end up doing Yibam. It says, by Kedushin, we don't have that problem. Because by Kedushin, she was supposed to do Yibam. You're just being strict to make her do Chalitza, because maybe the Kedushin of Miriam was effective. But by the get, she's not allowed to do Yibam. And you want to be strict and have her do Chalitza, maybe she's going to do Yibam. Okay. So far, we explained Rabba's position on why the case of Kedushin is different than Gerushin. The case of Kedushin was when he threw the money towards her. And the case of Gerushin was when there was a get that was given to her. The only thing is there's this suffix about the get. But we didn't choose a case where he threw the get towards her and it landed halfway. That would not be, that would not give us the halacha of chiletzes v'leimus yabemis. What would we have with that? If he threw the get towards her, we would have that there's no chalitza or yibam at all. Because, no, we would say that it's not a successful divorce. This is the confusing part here. It's not a successful divorce, which means that Sarah is at Sarah's erva. The get went halfway. Yeah, if the get went halfway, yeah, the suffix get, but we would say that it's not a get at all. And we would say that there's no yibam or chalitza on Sarah because Miriam is a co-wife of Sarah, and Miriam is Shimon's relative, which makes Sarah Sarah's erva, and there's no yibam on the right. There's no yibam.
So then you have to deal with that. Sarah. How do you deal with this issue now?
So we would say, so if Miriam is divorced, then Sarah's not a Sarah's erva, but Miriam is not divorced because the get was thrown, but it didn't reach her all the way. If you, it's a doubt if it reached her, but we would put her on her assumed status that she's still married.
You just have to make sure that she gets a get, otherwise.
Well, Reuven died. The husband died now.
Oh, okay.
It was before the husband died that this get was given.
No retroactive gets dead.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Against will, you can't say if I die, she's divorced.
There is such a thing, but that's complex.
Wow.
Retroactive. Okay. Esvei Abaya. Abaya has a question. There's a question on Rabbah. Let's say Reuven and Miriam are in a house that collapses. Nafal abayas alav al basachiv. The house collapsed. Now, remember, Miriam is Shimon's daughter. Reuven married his niece. Okay. They could use other examples, but this is an easy one. He married his niece. So now, who died first in this collapse? If Reuven died first, then Miriam, that was in the house with him, is the widow. And by the way, there's another wife, Sarah, that's a co-wife of Miriam. Okay, so there's no yibam or chalitza there, because a co-wife of an erva, Shimon is related to Miriam, it's his daughter. So there's no yibam or chalitza because Reuven died first. We don't know who died first. Possibly the co-wife died first. Possibly Miriam died first. That means that at the time of passing of Reuven, then Sarah is the sole wife of Reuven, and there is no tzara there. There is no co-wife. There is no relative of Shimon in this marriage. So there would be an obligation of Yibam.
Miriam died first.
Miriam died first. Okay, so the rule is Sarasa chiletzes v'leimus yabemis. You do chalitza. Gemara says 1 second. Abaya is asking on Rabbah. Amai, why do you do chalitza? What was the status before all of this? The status was that if Reuven would pass away, there would be no yibam. Sarah would be immediately allowed to get married without yibam or chalitza, because she was married together with Miriam to Reuven. That was the original status. You're just making up a thing that maybe Miriam died first, and now we have a whole thing about chalitza. How can you change the status? She had a status that she would be allowed to get married right away. If you'll say that that's so, okay, no. If you're going to say, let me use your pencil for a second. I put my comma in the wrong place. If you say that this was just a chumrah, really, you're right. You don't need chalitza. Why? Because the status was that Sarah and Miriam were both wives of Reuven. But however, chumrah dasali de kuluhu. But it's going to come out that there's a leniency. If you say that you do chalitza, then maybe they're going to end up doing yibam. According to the last answer that we just said, that whenever you say that you do chalitza, then you say that maybe they're going to end up doing yibam. So the Gemara answers like this. I have that concern by Gerishin Deshchichi Gazabur Rabbanan. I have a concern that we should not require chalitza when it's totally unnecessary. That maybe they're going to end up doing yibam.
We've learned many times before that either that you were permitted to, or actually recommended to perform chalitza, and yibum was completely off the table.
Right.
So in this case,
Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah, Yonatan is asking that we've had other cases before where you do chalitza.
maybe it's the weaker kind of chalitza. Remember we spoke
Well,
about stronger and weaker.
Over here, the problem is that we have an assumption that this woman, Miriam, is actually married to Reuven. And if Yibam would be performed, that would be a marriage of a prohibited karas, because it's tzaras erva. It's his brother. It's really his sister-in-law. It's Yibam is actually forbidden. So it could be the other cases we didn't have such a severe ramification. Over here we have a very severe ramification, so we don't want. Really, chalitza is not necessary. You want to throw in chalitza just to be strict. There's a problem with that because we may end up doing yibam. So,
I see.
When do we make that decree? If there's a doubtful divorce between Reuven and Miriam. However, collapsing houses, that's not so common. So, like Gazer Baraban and the rabbis didn't make a decree. What decree? That don't do chalitza because maybe they're going to end up doing yibam. That decree was never imposed. Gemara says in inami, or else another pshat. Gerishin the kaima erva the kamuchach b'tzarasa kamatzrich lechalitza. Amri kama be rabbanu begita d'git ma'al yavasali abume letzara. This is a very interesting answer. By the get, we had a real concern that maybe the rabbis established that the get was a good get. And that's why they're requiring chalitza. And that's why we're requiring chalitza. And they may end up actually doing yibam. So that's why we had a concern about that. How would the rabbis determine that it was a good get? They did some measuring. Where did the get land? Where was he standing? They figured it out. This was a halachic question. So they figured it out. By the mapilas, Mapilas mikama b'rabbanan b'mapilas, Are the rabbis able to figure out what happened in the past? I mean, both of them are now dead. They can't go back and figure out. Are the rabbis prophets? Everyone knows clearly that the fact that they're requiring chalitza is not because they figured it out. They're requiring chalitza because they don't know. So they're not going to allow yibum. We don't have a concern over here that yibum is going to be performed by the mapelas.
Do yibum in the first place because she was
A relative, a co-wife of a relative of Shimon.
even though both passed away.
Well, the husband passed away
Uh-huh.
and the co-wife passed away. The question is, who did the house collapse on first? If it collapsed,
I didn't think it mattered who was first.
well, the reason why it does matter who's first is because if the wife passed away first, then that would leave Ruvain and Sarah alive for a split second. Sarah remains alive, but Ruvain and Sarah that's the husband and wife now. Now, when Ruvain passes away, Sarah's the only wife that was left, and she has to do Yibam on Shimon. But if Ruvain passed away first, if Ruvain passed away first, then that would mean that there were two wives remaining when Ruvain passed away. One of them is Shimon's daughter. So there's no Yibam at all.
The issue is if Ruvain passed away first.
Yeah.
And we don't know.
We don't know who passed away first. So what we're going to say here is that the rabbis could never really figure it out. So the fact that they require chalitza was not because they established what the real scenario was. They just was a doubt. So we're not concerned that they're going to end up doing yibum.
They don't even do chalitza on this.
You do chalitza. You do chalitza, but this was a type of chalitza that didn't bother us. That maybe they're going to end up doing yibum also. Now the Gemara asks, "V'gabe Gerishin milay tanan." Did we not say by Gerishin the same thing? What did we say? Well, tanan we have a mishnah. Divorce. Let's say she's standing in Rosh Hashanah. V'zarkalan, he threw the get to her. Karev la, if it's close to her. Closer to her. Megureshes, she's divorced. Karev la, it's closer to him. Eina megureshes, she's not divorced. Okay, so far so good. Right? Mechzel, let's say it's half and half. Megureshes, feina megureshes. She's divorced, but she's not divorced. Okay, what does that mean? What is the relevance of being divorced but not divorced? Well, the relevance is the kayin who asurala. Let's say the husband was a kayin. He can't marry her back because she's potentially divorced. And a kayin is not allowed to marry a divorcee, even if it was his own divorcee. The ervahi. And if it's a relative of Shimon, the husband's brother, let's say it's his daughter, Tzarasa by Chalitza. Sarah is going to require Chalitza. It's exactly the case that the Mishnah did not tell me. That was the question. The question is, why does the Mishnah not tell me the case of Suffolk Gerishin that he threw the get and it went halfway? Rabbah said, oh, because in that case, there's no Chalitza. It's not true. In that case, there is chalitza. We have a Mishnah that says exactly that case. We don't say that just do chalitza mechumra, because we don't say that. Don't say do chalitza mechumra, because that don't do chalitza mechumra because you might end up doing yibam. We don't say that. We say do chalitza.
Yeah.
The whole story that Rabbah came up with, that why this case will not, even to be machmer, require chalitza, we see clearly in the Mishnah that that's not so. And Hayit Marallah, Rabbah Rabbeis Damar Tavayo Hacha B'Shtei Kitei Maskinan. We answer like this. That case had two groups of witnesses. Achasei Meres Karev Lav, Achasei Meres Karev Lai, Davalei Sveka Deraisa. In the case of the Mishnah that says you do chalitza, that's because two witnesses were standing there and saying, we saw that the get reached her. And there's another two witnesses standing on the other side that said, we saw that the get was closer to him. So in that case, we say that you have to do chalitza. We can't say that it's nothing because you have two witnesses that are saying that it was a valid get. Can't ignore them. But by us, we don't have two witnesses saying that it was closer to her. We have two witnesses in total. One saying that it's closer to her, one says close to him. So we don't even have a real get here that should be valid. The whole thing, did the get actually work? We don't know. No one's telling us that it did 100%. So the whole get is a suffix derabanan. We say we establish her on her assumed a status, which was that she's still married. So there's really no requirement of chalitza. That's why the Mishnah didn't say that case, because the Mishnah was talking about one group of witnesses, and we would not end up with the conclusion of chiletzes v'lei mesir benos. The Gemara says this is all a created assumption. You just made the case of a Mishnah, and then you told us why the Mishnah didn't do something because you just created what the scenario of the Mishnah was. It says, who made that up? That the Mishnah was talking about that there's only one group of witnesses. So the Gemara says, well, we didn't make that up. That's Dumya the Kedushin. Ma Kedushin bekatachas, af Gershim bekatachas. By the Kedushin also was a suffix. And the Kedushin was talking about that there was only one group of witnesses. So that's what we said. By the get, there's also one group of witnesses, so we put them on the assumed status. Gemara says, "V'kedushin gufayu mimaydik bekatachas tim beis kitayetim." How do you know that that's the case by the Kedushin? That there was only one group of two witnesses. It was only one pair of two. Gemara says, "Ibe beis kitayetim." If there would have been two groups of witnesses that the Kedushin, one group that said the Kedushin reached her, one group of witnesses, one pair of witnesses says the Kedushin did not, then tisyabim ve'im bekach klum. So then why can't they do Yibam? Why? I have two witnesses clearly that are telling me that Miriam and Reuven are husband and wife. Sarah, the co-wife, should be the opposite. I have two witnesses telling me that the opposite. I have two witnesses telling me that Reuven and Miriam are not married. And so they're telling me clearly that there's no marriage. So why don't you just let Sarah do Yibam on Shimon? Miriam, Shimon's daughter, is not part of this marriage. I have two witnesses saying that. Gemara says, what about the other witnesses that are saying that the marriage did take effect? And you're telling me that they could just do Yibam? Vesu, and also, even if you have two witnesses, two pairs of two witnesses, it's also a suffix derabanan. Damrina nuki trela bahadi trei, v'isha ukma cheskase midave nechse the bar shatya. Two groups of witnesses also cancel each other out. You don't just say, oh, now that you have two groups saying, one saying this and one saying that, you have to accept both of them. Two groups of witnesses, you can also say that you don't accept either of them.
Are these witnesses, are they witnesses to what exactly, where the get was thrown and where it was closer, or who passed away first?
No, where the get was thrown or where the Kedushin was thrown. What happens when you have two witnesses, two pairs of witnesses? It goes like this. The Bar Shatya, there was a person that was crazy. Zavin Nichse, he sold his property. Yeah, people took advantage of him. He had probably an expensive property that he sold for cheap. And two people come and say that sale was done. He was perfectly healthy. We could tell he was healthy. We had a conversation with him before. Mind was stable. And then another two witnesses says, oh no, he was not normal at that time. It was crazy at that time. The sale is not valid. Amar Ravashi says, you put the two witnesses together, and you leave the field the property in the land where it was in the possession of what it was before. You don't say that anything was changed there. So that's what we should say the same thing. So what did you have two witnesses? Same thing should apply. Basically, we ended up answering nothing with saying, we had a problem because we had a Mishnah that says that karev la, mechzal mechza, we say that you have to do chalitza. So we tried to make a difference between, which according to Rabbah, you don't need chalitza in that case. If it's a get, because we'll say that the marriage is still there. And Miriam and Reuven are still married. And Miriam is a relative of Shimon, an erva of Shimon. And therefore Sarah is a tzaras erva. And therefore there will be no yibam or chalitza from Shimon to Sarah because it's his daughter's co-wife. So there was a get. We'll say that get, that Rabbah claimed, that get does nothing because of the chazaka. The problem is we had a Mishnah that says it's not so. We say that still required chalitza. So we tried to answer that up by saying that there's a difference between if there are two witnesses talking, two groups of witnesses talking about the get, or if there was only one group of witnesses talking about the get. We just proved that it doesn't matter how many witnesses there were, as long as they cancel each other out, we're left with nothing. And if we're left with nothing, so then what's the pshat in that Mishnah that says you do chalitza? So Rabbah would say, oh, you don't do chalitza because you might end up doing yibam. It's not so. The Mishnah, you did chalitza. The Mishnah says you did. Elamar Abaya is a different pshat. Yagad al-Avreya, Abaya is such a simple pshat. Tana kedushin v'adin l'gerushin, Tana v'gerushin v'adin l'kedushin. You know why we didn't say it? For no reason. We said it by kedushin, the same thing would apply. Yagad al-Avreya means his friend says about him. That means the example that we gave for kedushin applies to gerushin also. Why don't you spell it out? We didn't have to spell it out. It's the same story. We added by gerushin another 3 that wouldn't apply to kedushin. But the case of kedushin applies to gerushin. Actually, the Gemara right here says, Tana b'gerushin, the Gemara starts off saying, the rules of gerushin also apply to kedushin. But the Gemara right away says, Amalei Rabbi Yagel Avreya Ma'izeu Diktani. I have a problem with accepting Abaya your pshat because it says Zehu. The words of the Mishnah was Zehu Safek Kedushin, Zehu Safek Gerushin. This is the doubtful kedushin. This is the doubtful gerushin. That means that it's being very specific about which case would be a doubt. Elama Rava says different. Kol sheyesh b'kedushin yesh b'gerushin. The case that applies to kedushin, which means that he threw the money towards her and it made it halfway, that would also apply to gerushin, where he threw the get towards her and it made it halfway. V'yesh b'gerushin mashenk b'kedushin. But by the cases of gerushin, that doesn't apply to kedushin. If you put the time, if you didn't put the time in, if you only had one witness signing, it was written in his handwriting, all of that doesn't apply to kedushin. And v'zehu de gerushin lav dafka. El mishum de tana zehu b'kedushin. Because it wanted to say that this is the case by kedushin, that's a suffix. So it also said that this is the case by gerushin, that's a suffix. Even though we do have more cases by gerushin, that's a suffix. What's the more case? The extra case is if he threw the get towards her and it didn't make it all the way. Okay. Now, v'zeh de kedushin l'mutemai. What's the case by kedushin where we say that it's what's the case by kedushin that we say that it's only by kedushin and that it's all that this is the only case? What are we excluding? What other case would not be considered a doubtful kedushin? We say it's this: the mutizman, the lekabet kedushin, the time, the date in a kedushin document is not so significant.
Aren't there like certain times in the calendar where you can't be betrothed? Or,
Not really.
No.
Yom Tov, maybe.
so in that case, that I don't know, but that date might disqualify.
Why? Why is it the date not? Yeah. So in a divorce, the date is very significant. Because at the time of the divorce, he owes her money. Do you need a coffee? Do you need coffee? Is there any coffee there?
There's no cups. There's
Oh.
no coffee.
I give you permission to use it.
Well,
You could use it. It's only used once, and it's clean.
it says rice coffee.
That's so I could reuse it again. I
Yeah,
don't have to get a new cup every time. But
But
you
you-
could use it.
and
I
then
haven't
do I
used it.
put it back afterwards?
Yes, sorry. Trying to save on cups.
Oh, wow.
The first cup was
Yeah.
That was not interesting. Yeah, the Gemara is going to ignore that. Why is the date important by a get? Because at the time of the divorce, he owes her money. He owes her the ksuba. If he had property then that he sold, she comes first. She comes first to collect it. So if the get was post-dated or something, or what's it called? Predated. So
Can't do that.
so then it affects the buyers of the property. Of if they he could be he just sold the property and predates a debt, predates a get, gives it to her, and then he goes to the buyer and takes the property back. He says, "I'm sorry, there's a title. What's it? It was they do title insurance. Title. They check to see if there's any debts on that property. Couldn't have found it because it was the get. The get wasn't given yet, and now the get's given with the predated get, so that could affect. So that on the divorce, it's important. But let's take a look over here what the Gemara says. Why is there no time? Why is it not significant the date on the marriage document? There's really a different story. Why the get needs a see. What happens is he eats. If she had a property that she brought into the marriage, the husband is allowed to use the property. He doesn't own it, but he owns all the profits, the benefits of that property. He can use it. So, yeah, and if it's an orchard, he could eat the fruits and all of that. Now, when they're divorced and he continues to eat the fruits, he owes her all of the money that he used, all of those benefits. He owes that to her. So the date is important in the get. What about the date in the kedushin? So if he would be allowed to eat those fruits immediately at the kedushin, then the date would be important. But he's not allowed to eat the fruits at the kedushin because there's two parts to the marriage. There's the kedushin and then there's the nesuin. He really only starts using the benefits of her property after the nesuin. So a date in a kedushin document is not significant because what? He doesn't eat the fruits anyway. Whether it says early, late, because we want to establish what time he was allowed to eat those fruits. Well, in the kedushin document, the time there doesn't tell me when he's allowed to eat the fruits. Right. Okay. However, there is one other reason why there should be a get, a date in a get, and let's see if that applies to the kedushin. There's a story like this. There was a guy that was married to his niece. So normally, if a woman would commit adultery, so the husband would be infuriated and have her, whatever punishment she's going to get. Turns out that this was his niece. It wasn't just a wife. So he cared about her because it was his niece also. So he would really like to resolve this issue and just let her go scot-free or whatever. So what he does is he writes a get and he predates it to before the witnesses testified that she committed adultery. And that way he saves her life. She committed adultery, she would be capital punishment. So he saves her life. So the date on the get in this case is significant. Now let's go to the kedushin now. She commits adultery. Wouldn't it be important for him to post-date the kedushin so that it's not considered adultery? He would do the same thing. So the date on the get is just as on the kedushin is just as significant as the date on the get. If it's about the fruits, he doesn't eat the fruits anyway. So we don't. What the date on the kedushin doesn't tell me anything about when he's allowed to benefit from the property. But if it's regarding basachaise, which is called that maybe he wants to have compassion on her that she shouldn't be killed because of she committed adultery, the same thing should apply. Elaman the mishum basachaise liskinsman. My answers mishum dika de makadosh bekaspa, vika de makadosh beshtara, like tikkun rabbanan's man. Well, not everyone uses a document to get married. A lot of people just we don't use a document to get married. We use a ring. The ksuba is not the marriage document. Ksuba is a monetary document that says what the person owes in case of divorce. It's not a marriage document. The marriage document would mean that the document says Harei at mekudeshes li b'shtar zeh. B'shtar zu. I don't know what to say, but it doesn't. We don't do that. So because some people don't use the shtar, okay. So therefore, they never instituted the date in the document of kedusha.
It's not written in the ring.
It's not written in the ring. Of the ksuba.
You're describing it almost like a star code.
Yeah, ksuba is a star code. Yeah, basically. I mean, he does agree. The Zan and the Mefarnasin, he does agree in the document that he's going to support her. But the main document is just saying that what she's bringing into the marriage and what she's going to get in case of divorce. Yeah. And the ksuba, it's not the same thing as the Eidei Yichud or Eidei Kedushin. The Eidim that sign on the ksuba, okay, whatever. So, I mean, you can't live with a woman that doesn't have a ksuba. They need to be kosher. No, the Eidei Kedushin are the Eidei Yichud usually. They usually do. But the ones signed on the ksuba, not necessarily. Yeah.
The ksuba is a divorce document, so technically it's really
Right.
it's done, but it's
Right. Right. But we have a rule. We have a rule that a man can't be with his wife unless they have a ksuba. That's a rabbinic rule. That was an institution that yeah.
I was trying to look at another angle of the angle, the difference in money to date and one doesn't of that someone else shouldn't be over the side. Like one is given and one, well, if there's a date, you know for sure you can't be over the side. For a divorce, he might be over that side, but it's part of the Ten Commandments, and therefore it's more clear. So steady state that you assume she's married.
That's a very interesting thought. That's a very interesting thought.
You assume they're married, you don't need a date. But Otherwise, you do need a date.
Right. Yeah, I don't know the date in the document is that no one's seeing, besides for the court. I don't know if that's going to affect the Leisachmet, but I hear, but it is relevant. You're coming up with another relevance of the date. Is it Eishes Reacha? Is it's just a prohibition?
Food itself doesn't create a marriage, so to speak.
Right.
Because you said like one of three things.
Right.
Was that one of the three just
Money, the document,
money?
or the intimacy.
But can you say that yichud could be the intimacy?
In certain cases, the possibly.
All right.
So this analysis then is variation of the effect of witness. It's on super versus the effect.
It's huge.
Operationally creates.
Right. That's that machlekes. If it's a chasima or a masir, remember that machlekes Reb Meir, Reb Elazar. Okay. Ella lamanda mishum basiliskins man. So mishum, the Gemara says mishum dika the makadosh bekasva, vika the makadosh b'shtara. There's different ways of making a marriage. We could use money also, and therefore they didn't institute. So leitik and rabbanus man. Amalei Ravacha Breder Rav Yosef la Ravashi. Ravacha Breder Rav Yosef says to Ravashi, va'avda dika the kani bekasva vika b'shtara v'tik and rabbanus man. If someone sells a slave, they put a date in the document, and you can sell a slave with money. You need to sell it with the document. The Gemara says, "Hasam ruba b'shtara, acharuba b'kaspa." He responded. He said, "There, most of the people actually sell a slave with a document, but by marriage, most people use money for the marriage. They don't use a document." Okay, sounds like what we do. Iba Yisema, another pshat is mishum delay efshar, because it's impossible. Heichel li'avid, how would you want to do this? Gemara is going to say that we're not going to trust the date in the document anyway. Why? What are you going to do? Linacha gabi dida. She may want to get out of the marriage or post-date the document. So what are you going to do? You're going to leave the Kedushin document. Who's going to hold on to it? Is she going to hold on to it? So machgale. She's gonna erase it. You want to leave it by him. He can just conceal the document. See, by the get, they were married already. Over here, he can just, I guess, destroy it. So let the witnesses hold on to the document. If they remember the date, so then they have to testify on the date. If they don't remember, they're not allowed to testify from a document. Why don't they just show the document? I don't know. Yeah, not a ksuba, a wedding document. A little phrase, right? The Gemara says, I don't know why the Bezdin can't just look at the document and say, this tells us. Document itself would tell us. It seems like Taisus is mentioning something like this. Okay.
Also slipped over to Suffolk night, scratching off the date.
Really? That's a problem.
This is in Israel. Suffolk night. Very, very fancy.
That's a problem. To erase a date in Exuba. But something erased in Exuba is also a problem. Because if you can erase a date, then maybe they can erase it later. That could have been just for the art. I don't know.
What did you say? The audience, so they changed the date, but they had a real Exuba.
That's okay. Oh, really? I'm not superstitious that it's because of the Ksuba. It could be for other reasons. Okay. If that's the case, then by the get also we would say that maybe they're going to testify from the document. It says Hasam la'atzala didakasi, hachalachayva didakasi. Over there, the get is protecting her. The get is saying that she's divorced. And that would help her to get out of problems of if she committed adultery. She needs the get. She doesn't want to hide the get. She needs the get. But by the Kedushin, it's only getting her into trouble that she's married. Because if she commits adultery, then that's a problem. So over there, it's more of an issue that maybe she'll erase it and all of the either she'll erase it or she'll destroy the document. And then no one can prove that she's married. So they never instituted the date in the Kedushin document. It was only in a Gerushin document. Okay. What does that have to do with us? Because when we went back to the Mishnah, we said that there were certain cases where she's Suffolk married that had to do with a date missing from a get, not a date missing from a Kedushin. Okay. Next Mishnah. Gimel Achin. 3 brothers. Nesun Gimel Nachrias. Married to 3 women that are not related. Yeah.
Finally. No, no nieces.
One of these brothers passes away. So he left a wife. So one of the brothers, let's say Reuven, passed away. So Shimon does Maimer, which is a type of Kedushin, on Reuven's wife, Reuven's widow. Now Shimon passed away. You can't do Yibam anymore. You know, Yibam could have been performed on Reuven's wife. Yibam could have been performed on Shimon's wife. The problem is that Shimon did Maimer, which means that now they're sort of part of the same household, Reuven's wife and Shimon's wife. Shenemar, as it says, the problem is that Reuven's wife has a zika of 2 Yevamas, of 2. First of all, she's considered Reuven's wife, and she's also considered Shimon's wife. And when it says Yevama Yavayala, the Yavam should live with her. That's only if there was one brother that's causing her. But here there's 2 brothers that are causing. See, if Shimon would have done a full Yibam on her, then the first Yibam from Reuven would have been over. And then it would have only been from Shimon's wife. it would be a Yibam coming from Shimon if Shimon passed away. But over here, it's coming from Reuven and Shimon. Reb Shimon says no. Shimon says you do Yibam on anyone. How does he learn this? He says if Maimer is really something, then fine. So Shimon's wife. If Maimer is nothing, then it's Reuven's wife. So if it's Reuven's wife, then really you could do Yibam on both. But the problem is maybe not. So you do Chalitza on one. Okay. Now the Gemara says, "Be'izika space Yevamin da'iraisa Chalitza nami leitibai." You quoted a pasuk. You said a pasuk that says that umeis eched me'am Yevama yaveh elef. One of them dies, then the Yevama, then the Yavam lives with her. Yevama, her Yavam lives with her. So the question is, over here, it's coming from two husbands, Reuven and Shimon. So why do you have to do chalitza? It's not the mitzvah of Yibam. When it says Elamid Rabbanan, rather this is only rabbinic. This is really a gzeira. It looks like the fact that one of them was Reuven's wife and one of them was Shimon's wife. It really looks like they're both Shimon's wife. Now, if you would do Yibam on both of them, then it would look like Yibam could be performed on two wives of the same household. And that's a problem, because we know that Bayis Echad, you only build one house. You don't build two houses from the brother.
So you don't get a brother's co-wife, even if they're not related?
When a person does Yibam, he only does Yibam on one of the wives, not on two of the wives. And over here, because Shimon did Maimer,
And you don't do chalitza either, I'm assuming.
right? You only do Yibam on one or Chalitza
So you
on
just
one.
Pick one?
Yeah, pick
Oh,
one.
wow.
Yeah. Okay. Now the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, Niyabim lechada v'nachlitz lechada. Why don't you do Yibam on one and Chalitza on one? Gemara says, well, that's also problematic because Gzeir Shem Yom Rabayas Echad, when it comes to one household, Miktsasei Bani and Miktsasei Chalitz. You marry one and you do Chalitza on the other one. People are going to think that you have to do Chalitza on the other one. So it says V'yayimru. So what do you care what people are going to say? No one's going to do Yibam. What's the big deal to do Chalitza? It's not an Aveira to do Chalitza. What do? You take off your shoe and spit. It's not there's no prohibition there. It says, you're right. If you do Yibam and then after you do Chalitza, so you're right, there's no prohibition. But let's say they do Chalitza first on one of them. Then you can't do Yibam on the other one. Chalitza was already performed. Asher le'yivne, once he decides he's not going to build, shuv le'yivne, he can't build afterwards. Become le'basher le'yivne. Rachman Amar, kiven shleibana shuv le'yivne. Okay. That's the problem over here, because it looks like it's from two households. Amar Rava, nasan get l'ma'amare. Let's say, what happened over here? We have Reuven passed away. Shimon does Maimer.
Shouldn't have done chalitza on any of them, on any of the wives. And the other one would be, can't do Yibam on the other one.
Right. Right. So if you do Yibam first, then that would have worked.
Yeah.
But there's a Gzeira not to do. Okay. Shimon did Maimer. Then Shimon passed away. However, let's say before he passed away, he gave a get to the wife that he did Maimer on. So Hutra Tzrasa, now that he passes away, his own wife is now allowed to do Yibam. Levi can do Yibam on Shimon's own wife. Aval hi asura. But Reuven's wife that had the Maimer is still asur. But the problem is over here that the get could have two functions. The get could take away the mimer, and the get could also be an attempt to take away the zika. If it was an attempt to take away the zika, the attachment, then after that you can't do yibum. So this was a get just for the mimer, but there's a gzeira, the michlafa babalas get. This could be confused with a woman that actually got a get for the zika itself, which was, although it's not chalitza, but you still can't do yibum afterwards. Ikadamri amarava, some say that Rava said different. Doesn't get them amari hutra, afilu. Then even she is allowed to do yibum on why? My time mada avid ba shakle. Whatever he did to her, he had removed. He did mimer, he removed the mimer. There's no gzeira that it's maybe a get for the zika as well. New Mishnah. Shnei achen nesuin shtei achayos. This is a very easy Mishnah. Two brothers. Yeah. Two brothers married two sisters. Meis achen me'an. One of the brothers died. Then Reuven passed away. He's married to Leah. And Shimon is married to Rachel. So right when Reuven passed away, of course, there's no mitzvah of Yibam, because Shimon can't do Yibam on Leah because it's his wife's sister.
Right.
But however, Rachel passed away. Shimon's wife passed away. That leaves Leah without a husband and Shimon without a wife. Harizu asura lavelamis. He still can't do Yibam on Leah. El benesra lav sha'achas, because at the moment of Reuven's passing, Leah was forbidden to Shimon because his wife was still existing. What's this pshita? You're telling me this Mishnah now? I heard this story before. And I heard this story that went Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. And you told me the story like this. Reuven passed away. And of course, Shimon can't do Yibam on Leah. So Levi did Yibam. And then Levi passed away. And before Levi passed away, Shimon's wife passed away. And you told me then that now that Levi passed away, we could say that maybe, actually, I don't remember if it was before. When did he pass away? Yeah. We said it's forbidden. It's Eishusach. Even if Levi had married Leah before Shimon's wife Rachel passed away, and now maybe it's sort of cleansed because Leah, when Reuven passed away, was forbidden to Shimon because it's his wife's sister, which makes it automatically also his brother's wife, which is forbidden because he can't do Yibam because it's his wife's sister. Then the rule of brother's wife comes into effect. Yeah. Yeah, that's what we're bringing out. Yeah. Right. So the Gemara is asking, if there was another brother, Levi, who married, and you still told me that Shimon can never do Yibam on Leah even after Levi passes away. Why? When Reuven passed away, this woman was still eligible for Yibam. And nevertheless, I don't say that when Rachel passes away, that she becomes permitted to Shimon. I don't say that. Over here, that at the moment of passing, she's immediately permitted to marry without any Yibam, because there is no Levi in our Mishnah. There's only Reuven and Shimon. So of course, when Shimon's wife Rachel passes away, you're not going to do Yibam. There's no Yibam. Right when Reuven passed away, the Yibam all went away. There is no mitzvah of Yibam because there's only one brother, Shimon, and he's married to her sister. and she's still alive. So she gets a heter to get married outside. When there was Levi around, you told me the same halacha. And that was a bigger chiddush. Now you're telling me a smaller chiddush. Where it says Tana, the way it worked was Hatana Beresha. This Mishnah was taught first, which is less of a chiddush. Why didn't you teach the bigger chiddush? Over there, we thought it would actually be permissible for Shimon to marry Leah. Why? Because Yibam was performed, and then Rachel passed away. Now, when Levi passes away, so Shimon's wife has passed away already, so maybe he can do Yibam on Leah. But however, then we changed the psak and we said that no, that case was also aser. The reason why we said that Mishnah first was because that was a chiddush. That was a precious chiddush to us, so we said it first. But Mishnah is but we still keep this Mishnah here, even though now that we have that for other Mishnah, this Mishnah is not significant because we've already said a bigger chiddush. Taner Rabbanan. Okay, we have a brisa. Let's say Reuven passed away and leaves his wife Leah remaining alive, and Shimon is married to Leah's sister Rachel. Shimon then goes and lives with his wife's sister, which is also his deceased brother's wife. Two prohibitions there. So Rabbi Yesi says he committed two crimes. He lived with his wife's sister, and he lived with his brother's wife. His sister-in-law in both ways, separate prohibitions, chayav on both. Why is one of them not yibam? Well, it was never permitted as yibam. Reb Shimon says no. It's only his wife's brother. Only one prohibition. But Tanya Reb Shimon, how could you say this? Shimon says that it's only his wife's sister's the prohibition. It's only his brother. Basically, Reb Shimon says it's only one. But which one? You have one brisa that says this, one brisa that says that. Two contradictory. It says like kasha. That's not a problem. Let's translate as Shimon. Depends. If Shimon married Rachel first, and then Reuven marries Leah. So Leah was prohibited to Shimon as his wife's sister. Now when it becomes his brother's wife, it was already prohibited as his wife's sister. So that's considered Achaisisha, his wife's sister. Here we're talking about the other case, is where Reuven married Leah first. Shimon is still a bachelor. Why can't he marry Leah? Because it's his brother's wife. Then he goes and marries Leah's sister Rachel. So the fact that Leah is his wife's sister, that doesn't take effect on what was already the premise that it's his brother's wife. Reb Shimon, Reb Shimon, let's say Reuven marries Leah first, and then Shimon marries Rachel. Interesting question. Reuven marries Leah. Shimon is prohibited to Leah because it's his brother's wife. If Reuven would pass away right then, there would be a mitzvah of Yibam. However, Shimon then goes and marries Rachel. According to Reb Shimon, the fact that Leah is Rachel's sister and Leah is prohibited as his wife's sister doesn't take effect. Why? Because Leah is already prohibited, because it's his brother's wife. So if there is no Achais Isha, his wife's sister, so then when Reuven passes away, it's not Achais Isha. She should be allowed to do Yibam. Amar Rav Ashi. Right. There are two separate punishments. Yeah. There are two separate punishments. That's true. But we're saying that that's not going to make a difference. Those two, the fact that it's separate. Rashi says it's not that it doesn't, that it just goes away. The fact that it's his wife's sister, it still is his wife's sister. Only thing is, while it's his brother's wife, then it's not his wife's sister. But the moment it's his brother's wife goes away, then his wife's sister kicks in. So therefore, the Gemara says his brother's wife never goes away, because right when that kicks in, it becomes a prohibition of his brother's wife, because he can't do yibum on his wife's sister. So what happens? It's his brother's wife. Because he can't do yibum. So his brother's wife never goes away. And that's what Reb Shimon meant when he said that if his brother got married first, that it would always be his prohibition of his brother's wife, not his wife's sister. Okay. Now the Gemara asks, does Rabbi Yossi really hold Isser Chalal Isser? But Tanya, we have a brisa. Basically, Rabbi Yossi said that you have two prohibitions here. You have for two. What are you looking? Rabbi Yossi is Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta. He says you're chayav for the brother's wife and also for the wife's sister, right? Reuven is married to Leah, Shimon is married to Rachel, and Reuven passed away, and Shimon decides to live with Leah, which is prohibited for him for two reasons. Rabbi Yossi says you chayav twice. Does Rabbi Yossi really hold Isser Chalal Isser? Depends which one came first, right? But we have a brisa. If there's a vera that has two punishments, you always get the stricter one. Rabbi Yossi you only get the first one. Vitanya, this is Rabbi Yossi's view. What are you telling me here? That there's two. Rabbi Yossi says there's only one, the first one. Vitanya Ketzadam Rabbi Yossi need the bezika rishayna. What does Rabbi Yossi mean that you get the first one? Habal of the first one that comes in. Well, it goes like this. Let's say he marries a girl. Her mother is his mother-in-law. Right. By the way, if someone lives with their mother-in-law, the punishment is shreifa, very strict punishment.
Is punishment.
But then the mother-in-law goes ahead and gets married. So now she's a married woman as well. So, so what's the rule? He gets the punishment of the mother-in-law. Let's say it was a married woman, and then only later it becomes his mother-in-law. Why? Because he marries the daughter later. So because she was first a mother-in-law, she was first a married woman, and then she became his mother-in-law. So the punishment would be because she's a married woman, which is chenek, strangulation. Amar Abavo. So the question is, why by us do we say that Rabbi Yossi says that there's two punishments? Rabbi Yossi agrees that if there's an Isser Maisif, an additional prohibition that comes in over here, then that takes effect. Let's take a look at what this means. Shimon marries Rachel. Leah has a prohibition on her as his wife's sister. Then Reuven marries Leah. Leah now has a new prohibition that it's his brother's wife. Now, how does the new prohibition take effect? She's already prohibited. Rabbi Yossi holds the first prohibition is the one that's the only one that remains. Everything else just gets washed off because the first one is already on. So the Gemara explains that Migudi Taisif Yisra what happened when Leah is married now to Reuven? If there's a Levi and a Yehuda and a Yisachar and a Zvulun, Leah becomes prohibited. Leah becomes prohibited much more than she was before. Why? Because Leah is now prohibited to Levi and Yehuda and Yisachar and so on, to all the brothers, because she's now Reuven's wife. She's the brother's wife. You see, originally she was only prohibited to Shimon because it's his wife's sister. Now it's all of their brother's wife. So because all the brothers now have a prohibition, so also Shimon now has a new prohibition as well. But if Reuven was originally married to Leah, and she's prohibited because it's the brother's wife, and then Shimon marries Rachel, what added prohibition is there? There's no added prohibition. She was prohibited to all the brothers beforehand, including Shimon. Now she's just prohibited to Shimon as his wife's sister. Nothing was added. Maybe not only is Rachel prohibited, but now that he married Rachel, he's now prohibited to Bilhah and Zilpah, which are Rachel's other sisters, which maybe he wasn't prohibited to before. He wasn't, because it was only Leah that he was prohibited to, because Reuven was married to Leah. Now that he married Rachel, not only is he prohibited to Leah, which was prohibited before, he's now prohibited to Rachel. He's also prohibited to Bilhah and Zilpah, which are the sisters. The problem is that that's an Isser Kailel, that's not an Isser Maisif. What's the difference, Kailel and Maisif? Maisif means that the woman that's prohibited now has now an extended prohibition on other people are also prohibited to her as well. She becomes more prohibited. It's not only is Reuven prohibited, Reuven was the wife. Not only is Shimon prohibited to her, but now the other brothers were also, because Reuven married Leah. So now Leah becomes more prohibited, a larger prohibition over Leah, extending to more people. But Isser Kailel means that I'm only discussing Leah, but you know what? Together with the prohibition that just happened to Leah, there's other girls over here that also got the same prohibition. That's called the Isser Kailel. It's Isser Kailel. So Rava answers, it's not that they're really two prohibitions. It's really one prohibition, but I consider it as if it's two prohibitions. The Gemara says, we consider it like two, but it's really one. The Gemara says, my nafkamina, what's the difference if it's considered like two? It says, l'kaver bein Rishayim gemurim, where she gets buried. Where he gets buried if he lives with her. That means that even though he's only going to get one punishment, of course, and it's considered one, which punishment will he get? He'll only get the first one, but he's considered more wicked, and therefore, when they make cemeteries based on what a person's level is. If someone that did a certain level of sin, he doesn't get buried together with other people. This person's considered a Rasha Gomer, so he gets buried with the wicked, very wicked.
We have those cemeteries today.
I don't know. Okay, let's leave it over here. Okay, have a good week, everyone.
So where do we leave off?
Right before
Thank you very much. Shkoyach.